好的，亲爱的华美人文学会的朋友们，大家周末好，我是我们华美人文学会的刘畅，那么也是今天的主持人，欢迎大家来到我们的周末讲座系列啊。那么今天呢，我们的这个主题是关于这个如何用英语来写中文绝句。那么大家知道，这个绝句啊，是我们中国诗词的一块瑰宝，也是一个特殊的一个呈现的形式啊。那么如何把中国的绝句更好的介绍到其他的语言里面，让其他语言的这个受众能更好的理解？那这个翻译在其中呢，就起到一个非常非常重要的作用。但是如何将中国绝句的精髓来翻译给其他国家、其他语言使用者的这样的一个读者来了解呢？就是我们今天主要为大家介绍的这样的一个主题和话题。那我们今天介绍的我们今天的主讲的人，这位这个教授啊，他也是在这个方面是有所建树的一位专家。那么稍后呢，我们将会请出今天我们的特邀主持人啊，这个许诗妍老师来为大家介绍。那么在我们这个正式开始之前呢，我们还是要为大家介绍一下我们今天整个这个讲座的规则以及大家需要注意的一些事项啊。首先呢，在您进到我们的这个讲座会议室里面的时候，您的视频还有声音默认都是关闭的。那么如果在我们的讲座过程当中呢，您的视频还有声音不小心被开启，那么请您自行关闭。那今天呢，我们这个精彩的一个内容哈，我们还是希望大家在一个不受打扰的环境当中来进行。那么在稍后呢，我们的讲座结束之后，会留给我们今天的观众一部分时间。那么您可以对今天的主题，还有您想提问的问题，那么我来进行提问或者交流。那么在我们整个过程当中呢，您可以把您想这个交流的话题以及想提问的问题打在我们的这个对话框里面。那在讲座结束之后呢，我会代表大家来向我们今天的这个主持人、主讲人，我们会来向今天的主讲人来进行提问哈。那好了，那我的部分呢到这里就结束了。下面我们就欢迎许诗妍老师来介绍一下您自己啊，也是我们的这个老朋友了。事实上哈，在不久前也在我们人文学会已经给大家来这个进行过这个讲座啊。那么许老师，您可以向我们今天的新的听众朋友来介绍一下您自己，并且呢，我们请出来今天的主角石江山教授。好了，那我把时间交给许老师。
嗯，好，大家好，呃，非常非常荣幸啊。然后，我是因为什么受到这个华美学会的邀请来主持这一场，是因为，我之前跟石老师的接触比较多啊，而且也是受了他的很多启发，然后也是在国内经常写文章介绍石老师的一些比较新的想法。那么今天呢，我就先介绍一下石老师。石老师，我觉得他的那些简历啊什么的，反正大家都能看到啊，然后我就不重复了，我就从我这个角度来说一下。我觉得第一点，石老师就是他特别喜欢中国。我跟他开玩笑啊，我说其实我也蛮喜欢美国的啊，我现在在拉斯维加斯呢，然后这是我第8次来美国了。我说实际上我也挺喜欢美国的，但是 You love China more than I love the US。我说绝对，我比了一下，我说你喜欢中国比我喜欢美国要多啊。我觉得首先他是一个特别爱中国的人啊，然后第二个呢，就是我觉得石老师他的这个就是学习的经历，其实跟我正好形成一个，我经常拿我跟他进行对照，就是我是在中国学英语的，他是在美国学中文的。就我们2个人都属于就是我们现在讨论最多的，就是那个学外语的人。我一直觉得我们俩的方法也不一样啊，是不是我这个是就是我这边用的基本上就是中国的这种方法，比较强调这个语言的基本技能，而石老师那边呢，他可能更多的就是直接去切入文化，所以也导致我们2个人的很多，我觉得我在很多方面其实是欠缺于他的。我觉得以前我唯一比较骄傲的就是可能我的语言技能要略好一点，但是现在有了人工智能的情况下，其实我倒觉得我们外语教学未来的方向，可能大家可以看一下，就是石老师，就是他作为一个学中文的人，他跟我们中国教外语有什么不一样的地方？然后第3点呢，就是 石老师今天要讲的这个内容啊，我觉得其实是有很多的开创性啊。很多人都说这个题目就看着觉得很有意思，叫用英文来写律诗，用英文来写绝句，也就是说，他绕过了这个语言的障碍啊。我们一般人觉得好像写绝句或者欣赏绝句，你不会中文，我跟你说什么呢？我觉得这其实就是一个很大的障碍。所以呢，今天我们就可以看一看石老师他是怎么样让这些完全没有接触过中文的人，可能完全对中文无感的人，我不要你学中文，我直接教你简单上手的方法，让你会写绝句，然后让你自己去爱上中国文化啊。所以我们就欢迎石老师来开始今天的讲座，欢迎。
石老师现在已经上线了，是吗？我们可能是需要给石老师一个权限。
对，对，
呃，
我刚才好像看到他说 "Hello everyone"。
我看一下哪一位是石老师。
Jonathan Stalin 好像他刚
哦
才在那个
，OK，
对话框里好
好的，对
像有。
的，看到
嗯，
了。好的，看到了。嗯、好，石老师现在可以这个 share screen 了。
Very good.
嗯，
It's
好的。
yeah, sorry, my screen is a little blurry. 大家好，我非常高兴来到这里跟你们交流。我听到我的老朋友徐老师的演讲，就要让他给我的演讲。我每一次非常喜欢听到他的说明我的工作。She's better at it than I am, I think. So thank you very much for inviting me here to talk about 怎么用英语写绝句、鲁诗。还有别的文言诗歌。I'm going to start. Uh, I'm going to start by showing a few videos, just to give you a sense of what is an English 绝句. So with the share screen, I should be able to give you just one quick 绝句that I wrote in the summer. Here we go. Thin stems, soft moss, thin stems, slopes of gold, all grass, stout trees, blue skies fold. We're here for such a brief time. Who knows what life will hold? This I'm going to pull out of this one. One moment. Pull up my PowerPoint. One moment. I have to share the screen again. My apologies. So I was trying to log in from an art gallery where last night I had an opening on my work on writing 绝句 and helping students write it. And I was going to give you a brief tour of the exhibit, but we're having terrible weather in Oklahoma, like across the nation, and the Wi-Fi went out. And then soon after, the whole power and the whole block went out, so I had to come back to the University of Oklahoma, where I'm giving this talk now in my office. But I wanted to show you briefly, where we would have been doing this talk. This is an installation of my desk. This is where I write 绝句. And I was going to give the talk there because I have all of my instruments for writing poetry. And I'll talk a little bit about the inspiration of how I'm teaching 绝句here in a minute. On the other side of the room, there is an exhibit on a project I call 唐朝英语 or Tang Dynasty English. It's related to the 绝句 project. and it's a little too complicated to go into in a short time like this. But it is a way I approach Chinese poetry is not through only through translation, as Xu Shiyan Lao Shi said. I engage Chinese poetry and literature in a number of ways. As the editor of founding editor of 今日中国文学杂志 book series, as a translator editor, also the Chinese Literature Translation Archive is collecting the papers of Ge Haowen and Arthur Waley, Gu Bin, Ye Weilian, 还有别的很有名的翻译家. So we could study translation. So I'm deeply committed to translation as a scholar, as an editor, as a community, kind of advocate for Chinese literature getting out into the world and studying how it's read and how it's disseminated and how it's published. But as a poet, as a creative person, actually, I turn away from translation, and my work explores the notion that translation is only a recent phenomenon in the transmission of Chinese poetry into the world. For over 1,000 years, Chinese poetry was not spread through translation. Instead, it was spread through the rhyme table tradition, through the imperial examination tradition, through it's not translation, it's not transliteration, but it is teaching other languages how to compose 鲁诗, right? How different Chinese languages, 200 Chinese languages or more, can write 拼则. How is this possible? With so many dialects, the languages are incomprehensible to one another. And yet, Chinese poetics and the tools of Chinese poetics, like the Yunjing, right, or the Qieyun before that, these were tools that allowed people to write a very sophisticated form of poetry across languages, including Vietnamese, Korean, and Japanese. So my work explores, what if we, instead of just seeing the East Asia and the Sino languages, Sino-Vietnamese, Sino-Korean, Sino-Japanese, and all of the Sino languages of the Chinese language family, what if we had Sino-English? And so this project, the one we're looking at right now, this is using a Fanxie system of the invention of the Qieyun to encode English. So all the rhyme tables are actually English, and the Fanxie is re-inscribing English. So it looks like Chinese, but of course it is just spelling English words and arranging them according to their yuanyin and fuyin, as you would find in the Yunjing. So this project is about 25 years old. I've been doing it. It's kind of my lifelong side project. And I work with people. I work in communities. Of course, Professor Xu is a long-time collaborator friend. All of my projects I think of as community projects. And Jueju is very much a community project. In 2 weeks' time, I'll be traveling to the UK and teaching Jueju in the middle schools and high schools there, and I do here. And I learn from the students, and I learn from other teachers. And gradually, the thing I'll talk about today has evolved through input from many people over a long time. But just to give you one last shot of the art show, and again, my apologies that we can't be there in person tonight. But the idea is that not only are is the idea from the Tang Dynasty, the Yunjing, but I also have endeavored to make the rhyme tables using my own woodblock printing presses. And this is sorry, here you can see them here on the base, the different woodblock prints that are made in order to try to imagine what would it be like if Tang Dynasty poets were writing 绝句、鲁诗、七言诗、五言诗、词、元, all of these in English. And so I guess at this moment I have to stop and for a moment and just reset my I need to reset my my PowerPoint to the beginning so I can show you a few things about how it's possible to write English 绝句. If you have a question at any time, please do make sure to write in the chat so I can stop and address your question. Okay, here we go. So one of the things that I love about, one of the many things I love about the classical Chinese poetry tradition is how one collects words. It's a kind of connoisseurship of language. One goes out, as Li He does in this biography from Li Shangyin. He goes out in the morning, he collects the words from his hiking, and he puts them in a bag. And he writes phrases, write words. They're authentic experiences in nature: a waterfall, a stream, a hill, how he feels, ideas that come to his mind in nature. He writes those down, and he brings them back home at the end of the day, and he rearranges them and into piles. His mother helps him arrange them into piles, and then he'll come back to it later, and then in time he'll return to write the poem through this process of 库音, 吃库的库, right? And 吟诵的音. This 库音 process is a very long process that you don't need to. Well, I'll address this question. Sorry, from Kexin. How do you view the Anglophone poems, avoiding the kind of flowery language? So we'll get around to the kind of language that appears in Jueju, but and I think I'll answer your question as we go forward. I like this book as well as one of my inspirations for how to teach Jueju, because painters, like poets, go out in nature and they collect the fragment, a kind of fragment, whether it's a leaf or a limb, a stone. And this captures a kind of qiyun inside the relationship between things. But you paint in your studio. You write your poem in your studio, not necessarily in the moment, but you can still re-enter the moment because you've so carefully collected your words. And so I like to emphasize this sort of, every detail of a poem is like putting it on a pedestal, treating it like something incredibly important, because it is important. And Jueju is a way of noticing the world. And so the first step for me in teaching writing of Jueju is to gather those words. And I teach my students how to take notes about the words. If we are going to get a blade of grass, or in this case, a kind of grain, where did you pick it up? What were you feeling? Where was the sun? Where was the wind? And you collect all this information. And so my method of teaching Jueju is to be outside of the house, try to get out into nature, bring that into your experience, and take a lot of notes as you collect the words that you'll be bringing into your poem. So this I call the 收集种子. Okay, I'm going to skip through some of these seeds because there's so many of them, but you kind of get a feeling for the moss that I collect or the leaves that I collect. And then the next step is to put these seeds into a book of poetry. And so this is what I call the sprouting seed process. But before I get there, I want to just talk a little bit about the language of English Jueju. How is it that English can write 鲁诗? It's a very simple and miraculous answer. The answer is that only English, in the whole world's languages, major languages, only English has enough single syllable words. And so there are 8,000 total cognate English monosyllables. And there's about 4,000 to 4,500 to 5 pretty good poetry words within that vocabulary. And just, I brought this up just to give you a sense of how many trees are single syllables in English, right? This means that in many ways, English can be thought of as almost as monosyllabic as Chinese, especially 当代, like 现在的汉语, is not monosyllable anymore, like it was more or less in Wenyan, especially in how poetry was written. So English is a rich monosyllabic language, and it's that serendipity that allows us to put it together in the same way as we would put together a Chinese poem. So where you would have Dongfeng, you can have east wind, right? 明月, you have bright moon. 晚日, right? Late sun. 青山, green hills. This kind of process of putting words together into units is only possible if you're working with a monosyllable. And so this is how Korean and Vietnamese build Chinese poems, through the monosyllable richness of those languages. And that's the Sino-Vietnamese or the Sino-Korean. Sino-Japanese is different, as some of you may know. There's a different system of writing hanshi in Japanese that is more complicated because Japanese is not a single syllable language. English is a much easier language to write 鲁诗 in than Japanese because English has so many monosyllables. And English also has a 平仄 system inside those, which we won't have much time to talk about. I'll briefly talk about it. Most of this time, I want you to hear some of the jueju from all over the world and then to have a conversation about it. But I want to give you the basics right out of the bat. So English is not a logographic language. So this is a question, maybe some of you know Cai Zhongqi, a well-known scholar of classical Chinese poetry. His argument, and I agree with him entirely, is that the root of Chinese poetry is the syllable, not the character. Now, this is not to de-elevate characters. It's incredibly important. Calligraphy is important. The character is very important. The kind of sight rhymes that happen between characters with similar radicals or roots, all of it, I understand, is very important. It's a part of the spiritual tradition. The characters, I'm not saying that they are inconsequential. However, when it comes to 鲁诗, characters don't matter. It is the phonological system of a language that Shen Yue, when he writes the Babu, the 8 don'ts in the prior to the Tang Dynasty, those rules only cover the aural, the sonic part of language. So English and Chinese, in this sense, both have what it takes. And what it takes is the monosyllable. Okay, so let's just take a kind of a quick tour of what the next step is. So I said we go out into the nature and we collect the word, because I don't want my students just to use their mind to choose any word, and I'll explain why in a little while. I want them to go into the world and find the piece of grass, find the tree, be next to the hill, find the stream, have the direct experience first, so that the poem is authentic, but also because there's a later part of the jueju form which requires that kind of qing jing relationship between the mind and consciousness and the natural world. It's a part of jueju, part of the form requires an authentic relationship to the natural world. So I try to make sure to emphasize that the words should not be arbitrary. So go and collect your words. So tones will be, this is Kexin, Huang Kexin. I'll talk about your question about tones in a moment. English works perfectly well in the tonal system of Pingze, but again, that comes in a moment. So we collect the word, and then I have the students describe that word. So let's say here on the screen, you see the word grain. And so we have a variety of adjectives that are pointing in arrows down. So we have gold grain, dry grain, cracked grain, right? And then on the other side, those are the verbs, the 动词, that the grain can do. What does grain do? Grain stands, grain falls, grain sheds. Okay, these are all verbs that grains do. Once the student has earned the adjectives and the verbs, now they have started to build the vocabulary of a jueju. Okay, so let's take we've talked about one pairing, which is the adjective noun. Here we have the noun plus verb, right? So 夜来, right? Here, 夜来. We have night comes, right? Or we have here 花落, blooms fall or bloom falls. Notice that if I put an S on those English words, it doesn't add an extra syllable. So 3-word units can have a variety of different kinds of 3-word units, but a jueju has 2- and 3-word units, and that's how we build the jueju. And so I will have the students create 3-word units next. So bright moon, adjective, noun, verb, bright moon shines, for instance. Okay. And so we go through a variety of ways to build the 3-word units, and then we can put them together, right? You have the bright moon, and then you have, spooks, night birds. So you have 2-word unit and a 3-word unit. So we start with the word, then we expand to the unit, then we expand to the line. Okay, so this is the building blocks of a Jeju poem. Starts with words, we gather them, we sprout them into units, and then we organize them into lines. And so I go through a variety in my classes of many different kinds of combinations of parts of speech. I'll explain why parts of speech are so important in a minute. But just some beautiful ways of putting these 3-word units together. Star, drenched, night, right? Dew, wet, leaves. This is a way of using verbs as adjectives. So whether my students are in China and they're second language learners, learning English, some basic parts of speech and how they relate to one another, or if they're native speakers of English, learning to write classical Chinese poetry, the parts of speech is a kind of basic need for the 对联, 对仗 that we'll get to in a minute. Okay, so once we have, again, built the units, then we can start building the lines, and then we can organize the lines into couplets. So here I had slow sun, sets low, casts faint light, quick wind, pale sun, leaves, spin down. Okay, this is not parallel yet, but you start to hear the cadence of a qi and shi here, right? So now let's talk a little bit about the way that the poem is read out loud, right? So part of writing Jueju is learning how to read Jueju, or Lu Shi for that matter. So when I teach the form, I'm also teaching that, when you have a unit, you have a pause between the units. So it's white stones, pause, soft breeze, pause, cold stream flows, like that. And so they start to learn inherently the way to yin song or lan song, 一个, jue ju, is embedded in the structure of the poem. The structure teaches us how to read the poem out loud. So as you learn to write it, you also learn to read it. And so for my Chinese students, their recitation of Chinese poems is much improved after they've learned English Jueju, because they know how the patterns work, and they become much more relaxed and proficient. All right, so I'm going to pop out. Sorry for skipping through some of these slides. So the next part I would like to emphasize is, after we've built a line of nature poetry, is to start talking a little bit about the third and fourth lines of the Jueju poem. And so in this, I usually will introduce the idea of the Qing and Jing as core concepts of Jueju culture, and that the feeling that we get from nature, so when we put ourselves in the first 2 lines, sometimes that natural world can influence how we feel, make us feel connected to the world, can center us and give us well-being and mental health. That can have a positive effect, being in nature. But there's another side, which is that our mind actually shapes the way we see nature. So nature, if we allow it, can help shape us, but we always shape what we see, right? And so in talking about this, whether I'm talking about Wang Guowei's theories of Qing and Jing, so this is an opportunity to talk a little bit about the evolution of these concepts from the early early Tang period where some of these concepts kind of start shaping all the way through the Qing dynasty and into the 20th century, we can start to think about how important it is to connect the mind and the feeling and human emotion to the natural world, and that is the root, that is the heart of classical Chinese poetry tradition. And in this, it also offers an opportunity to reflect both on Taoist philosophy quite a bit, but also on Buddhist philosophy, which is so important after Wang Wei in the Jueju tradition, to think about how the boundary between what is mind and what is the world is a philosophical question. And so a Jueju is a philosophical genre because it questions what is interior and what is exterior, what is nature and what is my perception of nature, right? So the boundary between the self and the world becomes ambiguous. It becomes porous. And in fact, it can become non-dual. Let me see if I have. I will give you this example now of, you see on the left-hand side, there's one word. Let's call it, we could call it grass, or we could call it grain, or we could call it hay. But there we have it. We have a noun. On one side, I asked the students to describe it using negative words. So they have frail, dry, dead, cracked, dull, spent, cold. On the other side, I asked them to use adjectives that are positive: gold, light, fine, rich, lush, etc. Okay. What's important here is that the noun did not change, you guys. It's the same object, but the person who sees the object determines whether it's gold or whether it's brown, whether it's dull and cracked or whether it's light and fine. None of these are wrong, but the person who sees nature defines nature. Our mind shapes the world. This is important because as we move forward, that is the core of the first couplet's relationship to the second couplet. So we have the qi cheng zhuanhe structure. So that's the next part of teaching Jueju. So we start with the qi, right? We start with introducing a natural scene: dark limbs, jeweled with pale red beads. We extend it, right? That's the next line. Light stems sprung from tight wound seeds. Just nature. It does not have any emotion. It does not have any mind. It does not have any human concepts. It's just a natural world. This is the qi and the cheng. But zhuan and he will introduce something different. Give us worlds that should have been. Give us worlds that should have been. Spring days flush with blooms and reeds. So I wrote this poem on the day that Kiev was, in the opening of the war between Ukraine and Russia. It was a very sad day for everybody in the world because, of course, we don't want to see war. And it dawned on me in that morning that the springtime was not going to happen for a lot of people. Like the flowers and the beautiful things that were going to be ignored because there were more important matters of life and death and worry and dread. Where's my family? And so in that one moment, the whole season disappeared. It's a small thing. People won't talk about it on the news, but Jueju gave me an opportunity to use the beautiful line of nature and then introduce something very subtle, right, in the zhuan and in the he lines, and of course we have to remember too that the Jueju and Lu Shi is a kind of political verse. It can talk about politics, it can talk about the world affairs, but it does so only subtly, only in the most, nuanced way, right? Through the emotive world of human consciousness and through the small things of leaves and grass, right? This is why Du Fu is such a powerful poet in particular, is his ability to transmit such important historical information through natural imagery. So the next thing and last thing, really, I think I'll talk about before we move on to Lu Shi question of the tones, which was asked by Ke a moment ago, is to see how a good Jueju poet will be able to tune their human feelings to the natural world. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a moment here with these examples. So, so here we have two lines of nature. Cold wind slips through tall bent reeds. Dry blooms fall on brown cracked leaves. Okay, so that's just the first two lines. But now I'm going to tune that poem to make it colder and to make it much more aggressive in its winter brutality. Shrill wind, not cold, it's shrill. Shrill wind slips through cold bent reeds. Old blooms fall to dull cracked leaves. Okay, I've taken the color out, I've emphasized the temperature, and I've turned the poem toward the end of life, end of the season, to this kind of end of the year. It's cold, it's barren. Okay, now I can write a poem that will have this meaning in the emotion, in the consciousness, and the feeling. Shrill wind slips through cold bent reeds. Old blooms fall to dull cracked leaves. How long can we hold our breath or dream of years blown like weeds? Okay. The poem is not a happy one. It's a philosophical in its tone, but it has a pretty heavy emotional feeling. I'm going to turn it the opposite direction. It's no longer cold. It's brisk, which is a positive feeling, right? Brisk wind slips through deep green reeds. Flung blooms spin to gold spun leaves. How long can we save this breath? Warm winds still blow our winged seeds. By tuning my adjectives, I've kept my nouns the same. By tuning them to the positive frequency, I'm now able to take the poem and reverse the meaning, the human intention and meaning of the poem. And that's the idea of attunement. So the natural world is the natural world, you guys. We can't, it is what it is. But how we see it will determine what kind of poem we write, what kind of mood we're in. The natural world is a transmitter and a resonator for our human emotion. And this is the Qingjing relationship that is one, it's a fundamental part of the Jueju experience. I'm going to read Kexin's question here. All right, so most people write in a mixture of modern Chinese and ancient Chinese. Only some young people in China are trying to experiment with it being completely in modern Chinese. As I know it is not recommended to use Shakespearean English in English, and it's not very likely to get published. So yeah, it's true that the poems I'm reading to you, like the one I just read to you, it doesn't sound archaic because the archaic language that of late Middle English, like Shakespeare, is polysyllabic. So Shakespeare's language is very polysyllabic because about 100 years earlier, very, not much before Shakespeare, the English language went through a major transition because it started to import a lot of French words, and it also brought in languages of high class languages of like law or medicine and these kinds of things, which are Latin and Greek. And these, what they're called inkhorn words, came in and sort of started to displace a lot of what was the Anglo-Saxon language, which was much more monosyllable, single syllable words. Then the vowels went through a shift. The final E that is the silent E in modern English used to be out loud, which means most of those words were two syllables, but it went quiet. And so there was a moment when the English language blossomed into a monosyllabic language, but it is not the language that Shakespeare uses. So when I read a Jueju, I'm actually reading very old English. It's ancient English. It predates Shakespeare in many ways because the monosyllables are very old words. But it doesn't sound ancient. It just sounds trans-historical. It has no flavor historically because these are common words that most second language English learners know these words. They're very simple, but they're not used in a poetic form. Before English Jeju, there was no what is the kind of a single syllable foot in English doesn't exist. So this form, English Jeju, invented a new meter for English, which was bop 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 bop, right? Bop 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 bop. Stress, 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 stress. Now, when we get to the Pinza system, you'll see that that is nuanced more. So I'm going to go around to it. I hope everyone is as interested in answering Cushing's question as I was. I apologize if it's too detailed, because I know I want to get to the part where we can hear some poems, because I think you'll enjoy listening to the Jueju from all over the world. All right, let's keep going. So I had a couple more examples of attunement, but I'm going to go ahead and skip through these so we can get well, I'll kind of give you my hint. I give hints to my students about how to create a good zhuan line. How do you turn a poem? And so asking questions is a really good way to create a zhuan in English. Another one is like tell the reader to do something, look up, don't flinch, you are here, right? This is, of course, like Li Bai's 夜视, they kind of look up, look down, 举头, Wang Mingyue. All right. And then you answer the question in the fourth line. So, who will meet me on the road? Bright moon, faint stars, my old friends, right? Which means no one will meet me on the road. None of my friends are there, only the stars and moon, right? What does time leave in its wake? Late sun seeps through thin-stemmed trees. It's just nature, but it answers the question, what does time leave? Nature. Time doesn't leave us. We disappear, but nature continues. So these are the philosophical questions. You can answer them without answering them. You just give imagery, and it is like a miracle that the poem delivers a profound answer. And so the poems are always teaching me how to be a more broad, have a more broad mind, a bigger heart, because the technology of Jueju, the way that the poem is put together, I think teaches the people who read it and also the people who write them. All right. So now we get to Pingzi. I will tell you, like usually this is a 6-week class, so obviously I can't expect us to do that now. But I'll just say, like English and Chinese, like I said, two languages with single syllable words. Both of them have a kind of shengmu and a fuyin and a yuanyin. They're amazingly similar languages, so we can use all the same principles to use English that we use in Wenyan. So what is ping and what is zi? Is a question that is not easy for modern Chinese speakers. Just like Kexin suggested, a lot of young people today in China write Jueju and using Kouyu and this kind of Putonghua, right? And yet Putonghua doesn't have rusheng. It doesn't have the P, T, or K ending, which means it doesn't have a very important piece of the puzzle for writing Wenyan Shi or writing Lu Shi. So what is, I can kind of show you in this screen here. These are the 4 modern Putonghua tones, right? You have ma, 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 and ma. You'll notice the last one, ma, is it's a much shorter, but if you put a P at the end or a T, right, or a K, this will become ma, ma, even shorter. So let me give you an example. So if you have the Chinese word ye, like a leaf, in Mandarin, it's a very short sound because it's 4th tone, ye. But in Guangdonghua, in Cantonese, it's even shorter because it has a P, yip, yip. And so the P takes the vowel and it shortens it. So if you look on the other side, you see in 2 English words, need and neat, need and neat. Neat has a T at the end, so you swallow the vowel, and this is called an allophonic clipping, It happens for every native speaker of English. This is the rule of pronouncing monosyllable English. It's not taught in textbooks. Americans don't know they do it. So we have to discover this rule, and then we have ping words like need and zi words like ni. About 60% of English monosyllables are ping, 40% are zi. So how does it work? So a ping word ends in a 浊的声母 at the end, or 辅音at the end of the word. If it doesn't vibrate, it will be a zi. So if it has a P, a T, K, F, S, CH, SH, or unvoiced TH, that's a zi word. So yes, that's right. So this is Kexin's question or a point about how to construct 绝句 today in 普通话 or in Hanyu. There are adjustments that are made in order to accommodate the loss of the rusheng, and the rhyme dictionaries of today will allow for the rules to still be used in modern Mandarin. So that's true. What I'm saying that I think is relevant to my talk is that for English, we don't have to modify it. English just has ping and zi, 50%, almost half and half. So it's much more similar to Chao, to Tang Chao Hanyu than you would imagine, because there's monosyllable words and they follow the same rule of long, full, and clipped short, full, short, full, short. So as we go to forward, you can hear the difference between, again, the need and the need. So let me give you a couple of examples. So we're going to build, I'm going to show you since it's Chinese New Year coming up, I'll show you a duilian, Chinese New Year duilian that uses this system. But here we have a two-word great wealth, hard grind are long, and great wealth are short. So they're opposing each other, right, in this duizhang system. Dusk spreads gold, dark sets cold. You can start to hear the vowel difference. When you understand it, you can emphasize it in the reading, and this allows the students to start to break the English language into the pinyin. So when they collect the word in nature, now I tell them, okay, put a pinyin symbol over each word so that you know which words are ping and which words are zi. And so in the kuyin system of building the poem, you can actually become quite good. And so these are children that I teach you guys. So it's not very complicated to do pingzi. It does take a few hours of instruction to get good at it, but it isn't rocket science. It just takes a moment. It's a game, so it takes a moment to learn the rules. Okay, I'm seeing here Kexin. Oh, sorry. It's a personal note here I was reading. Yeah, I will come back. That's really cool. Thank you for listening that to me. Okay, so we get to the pinyin system of English and we start realizing that we can start organizing the language into pinyin words. And this is, of course, I showed you my art gallery, the display. This is about organizing English into pinyin, the long and the short. And so I make the ying yun jing, right? The English yun jing, English rhyme tables, and so on. And these are just some examples. As we go through, we start to learn how do you start building the relationship in duizhang and parallelism between zizi and pingping. So sharp peaks versus soft hills, or soft dreams flow, slow thoughts drift. Thoughts drift slow. I'm going underneath it. Soft dreams flow. And you'll start, the more you practice, your ears will adjust to the short and the long of English, just like it does when we learn how to yin song, Tang Chao, Shi Ge. We also have to pay attention to the way the tones will elongate and close. And I'll show that in a moment. So I promised you a duilian. Here's one very quickly. So here we have 书山有路勤为径学海无涯苦作舟. So here's my example, similar. It's a ping start, 对联. So here we go. Great plans, or sorry, grand plans, great wealth, time to start. So ping ping ze, ping ping ze. Then underneath it, we have tough work, hard grind, life takes time, ze, ping ping, ze, ping. So on top, we have ping. On the bottom, we have ze. If we have ze on top, we have ping ping below. But now we look at the meaning of the words. Great plans above, tough work below, right? Opposite. Great plans, tough work. They're not opposite. They're related to one another in a somewhat antagonistic, but related way. Great wealth, hard grind, right? Great wealth, it's hard work. Great wealth, hard. So it's a 对仗 as well. Time to start. Hey, life takes time. So let's work hard, you guys, in the new year. Let's bring wealth to our families. Let's work and make great plans. But don't forget to take time, because the real wealth of life is spending time, quality time with our loved ones, having peace of mind, having a good life. So don't struggle so much that you forget to be alive, right? So it's a very wise. You put this up. I have one of these on my wall or on my door, in English, because I think when you make language balanced, when you balance the grammar, you balance the meaning, you balance the tone, right? All of these are balanced. It means the language is auspicious. The language is good luck. The language is balanced and harmonious. The meaning, the sound, the structure. I put that on my door because it brings into my house balance and harmony and meaning and wisdom. So 对仗, 对联, 鲁诗, these are very important, I think, cultural aspects of treating language as if it was a real thing, that it actually affects the world. It can sometimes be almost, for a Westerner like me, a little bit almost superstitious, like how a person's name, if it rhymes with like death, maybe could have been quite bad in the past. You couldn't get a job if your name rhymed with a bad word. The fourth floor on a buildings, these kinds of things. This is kind of like words. The sound of words matter. They can affect things. They're bad luck, good luck. That's a part of this system, but it's bigger than that, right? It kind of feng shui of words, that words are what our mind is made of, and that it's also what society is made of. So if you're going to take the Keju exam, of course you should learn how to write 鲁诗, because it means you know how to balance the substance of mind, which is built in language. Of course, this will be a skill that a leader should have, because we are language, right? And so I think that 对联 for the New Year's is a really good example to yes, yeah, this is Cushin's point, which is to everyone. I would agree with, but in this case, I'm using I think a standardized approach to be able to teach all of these concepts and to bring them into the English language. So let's move through, all the different patterns that the students write. They will learn, oh, I just wrote a 字 start, 起句, or I just wrote a 拼 start, 五句, right? They have to learn these words because that's the genre of the poem, and they learn the patterns, and they learn what the patterns mean, and of course they learn how to write the patterns. All right. So I think rather than reading these, I'm going to, mention this briefly, which is that one of the things my students love to hear at the end is that you don't have to follow Pinza perfectly, right? You can pretty much ignore the first, the third, and the fifth, right? So, this 1 and 3 and 5, not so important. 2, 4, 6 is important, and 7 is the most important. And that will be important here in a minute when we learn how to read the poems out loud. So I'm going to finish there, and then I'm going to turn it over to some of the students who have written the poem. So let's hear. I will play my song of the Chinese and then the English.
月落乌啼霜满天，江枫渔火对愁眠。姑苏城外 鞍山寺，夜半钟声到客船。
And now, oh, sorry. Here we go.
Moonlight, crows caw, frost coat sky. Sweet comes boat light, wait, I lie. Outside 苏州寒山 shine. From both bells ring, sound close by.
All right. I'm going to stop there for a moment and going to pick up, let's see here. I have to stop pull up a different screen. One moment. So let's go ahead and now listen to a few students who have composed these poems. So we'll start in London.
Hello, my name is Ariella Harrell and I'm 11 years old and I attend St Paul's Girls. Here is my duet poem titled Exotic Beach. Air sweeps, sea flows, blue sharks twirl. Wind glides, shores meet, dense leaves whirl. Young men, lost hearts, clear waves froth. Rocks form, stars glow, bright boats swirl.
We'll go to Italy next.
New Year. I'm Jeanette Tianhui Law, and my Jeju is called For Those Who Flee. Swift horse, flee horde, swords wax war. Winged ride, comb cliffs, fate's moon door. Strange walls, shred nest, home ways weep. Dawn mist, jade swells, ships reach shore.
And now to
Hello, my name is Maria. I'm from the old and beautiful city of Smolensk. I'm extremely happy to be a part of this wonderful competition. Let me present my Jeju, which I wrote thinking about shining beauty of the Smolensk Lakes National Park and about human life itself. Rich life, green shine, fresh silk leaves, blue sky, bright lake, branch, wild leaves, small trail, dark grass, grow your path, reach spot to stand, blessed last. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.
winner of the Jeju Prize in China contingent.
Hi, friends from all over the world. My name is Tianjin Chong, and I'm from China, and you might call me Sophia. The title of this poem is The Urn of Life, which is dedicated to everyone who has undergone unspeakable pain and bewilderment in the quest for the meaning of life. The End of Life. Cosmos, Jade Sea, crest, built, sails, wind seas, white peaks, cross-lined tails. Death snail, flash face, throws, quail, quests. Dust props, new dawn, life left trails.
High peaks, low clouds, snow drifts round. Boughs creak, wings flit, half-heard sound. Feet slip, hands part, dusk fades fast. Spring blooms, day breaks, small bones found.
About here. And I'm going to play one last about 5-minute long video. It ends with several poems written by students of mine. This is a recent trip. I often will teach the Jeju form in a traveling context. So this one is in Italy this last summer. And it'll follow through and kind of show all the methods, all the things we've talked about, and then it finishes with their poems. After that, we'll have Q&A. So here's that.
Every dollar wasted away, cheap times replay, chasing girls with all the face. What is truthful? What is real? Why can't I still pin down how I really feel? Should I flee or should I kneel? Should I give when I want to steal? She told me to give up the good fight and throw your fist when the time is right. At my time, I hold it tight. I'm clumsy, I lose it, but you can't waste what is out of sight. Should I stand or should I escape this world and the home? Every dollar wasted away, Cheap times replay, chasing girls with all the face. What is truthful? What is real? Why can't I still pin down how I really feel? Should I flee or should I kneel? Should I give when I want to steal? Only she told me to give up the good fight, though you fist when the time is right.
Twine brush, lone paths, roots parse, die, foiled bloom, dual fates, both truths lie. Would you seek life where lives pass? From death, souls rise. This is why. Smug breeze, young heart shines, meek light, faint soul pines. This life slips so quick that we seek fate's signs. Rough bark, frail leaves, weak ants climb. Tame stems, fresh light, stiff vines twine. How can we take home these gifts? Take heart, dare to keep lost time. Dense mist, keen shards, sharp cracks stain. Cool haze, weak glass, bent blooms chain. Is my heart hurt from my past? Faith lent, when will dark grief wane?
All right. I suppose that would be a good place to end the presentation, so we have plenty of time for conversation.
Okay, thank you very much, 石江山教授。Okay, so the rest of the time I think I will give to our audience today. 那么接下来的时间呢，我们就要看一看今天我们的观众朋友们有什么样的提问哈。好，那么现在呢，已经有一些观众朋友在这个我们的对话框留了言哈。那么 here's a question. So how do you view that Anglophone poems actually a voice of flowery language? 那就是说这个你怎么来看这个英语诗歌实际上避免使用一些这个比较花哨的语言这个对 So how do you think about this? How do you view?
Changleo, I'm sorry, but I was kind of listening, but I was also trying to see if how many questions there were in the feed. One last time, the question, and then I'll respond. My apologies.
Okay, so here's several like comments here, or they left the words here, but not everything or not everyone is a question. So far that we could say the first question is, how do you view that Anglophone poems actually a voice flowery language. So 那用中文我们可以大概就说，在一个英语的诗歌里面，我们怎么能够来避免一些比较花哨的一些语言啊？那现在我们请石教授来给我们解答一下。So please.
So one of the history of the word flowery language and the critique of flowery language in English comes from Ezra Pound. Ezra Pound described the Romantics as flowery. That he of course rejected the flowery language, and he built the critique on his interpretation of Tang Dynasty, of Li Bai and Du Fu's work in particular, and based off of Ernest Fenolos's translations, and he translated the Chinese poems into English for the first time in Cathay in 1916. So the way that we talk about flowery language as a negative thing actually wasn't a negative thing until the influence of Chinese poetry on English. So I like your question because it reminds me of my other hat as a scholar of the historian of the relationship between English and Chinese poetry. The very idea of flowery was not really a problem when we are reading, someone like Longfellow, whose language was so full of sound and full of large ideas and so on, but it was overloaded. It was a kind of maximalist sort of poetry in a way. And so when Pound comes in, he just starts cutting everything back, right, into just the root words. And then you have William Carlos Williams, who follows that, H.D., Hilda Doolittle, Lorraine Niedecker, another early kind of avant-garde, mid 20th century, early mid 20th century avant-garde, also continued to take English and turn it down and down and down until it's really, really, just as William Carlos Williams, just the facts, right? Just the facts, man. No ideas, but in things, this idea. So I like your question because it reminds us of this history. But I will say that English monosyllables don't allow flowery language, because flowery language, those are long words typically, and long phrases. And so when you only have 5 syllables per line in a wujue, right, you have no room for flowery. In fact, we have no room for flower. We have to use the word bloom, right? So this is moving in the opposite direction, right? The opposite direction from the flowery language. So I don't think it's a problem for English Jueju. Now, for other kinds of English poetry that we can talk about imagism and objectivism, and we can talk about the history of English poetry. It's a different conversation.
Okay, thank you， 谢谢石江山教授。So 这里呢，我们还看到一些讨论哈，是关于这个就是 rhythm， 就是这个韵脚啊。那所以呢，这个我相信我们今天大家都可以看到我们的对话框啊，所以对于我们的讨论问题，那我们就可能不占用时间了，我们还是把更多的时间留给一些问题，所以石教授可以来给我们进行解答。那么讨论部分呢，大家可以自行的来进行观看哈。好，那么 so here's another question. And this Yunlin asked the question. So since monosyllabic words in English are still limited, so do you think after some time some of the phrases or expressions will become formless and lost the freshness? So 您怎么觉得？
Yes, I think it will. I hope it will. Because if that happens, it means we succeeded. It means we brought Jueju into English fully. For it to become stale, it has to exist. That will be a tremendous triumph for English Jueju. So I don't worry about that future at all, because I see it because I judge Jueju competitions, right? So I can tell when a student has read the previous winners and they use the same phrase or they use the same rhyme scheme. But just like Huang Tingjian with Duo Tai Huang Gu, it's a kind of like, that is a part of the Chinese poetry tradition. Stock phrases aren't bad. It's how you use them, right? So when you have a phrase that someone else used, it's a kind of citation, right? It's a citation. it is a quotation from another poet. So we have conversations inside of poems, which are allusions to other poems. So by the time we get to the, to the Ming Dynasty, Lu Shi is filled with this. It's just completely full, right? And Huang Tingjian says it's okay because we turn, we can choose the words of another poet but change the form, or we can take the form and change the words, but we're always using other people's words after 100 years, after 200 years, after 1,000 years. So the problem, is definitely possible. But right now, English Jueju is so young, you guys. So I mostly, when I see a good Jueju, it is breathtaking because it's so original, because no one has ever put those words together in that way, because the form has not existed until 20 years ago, right? And so, so I don't worry about it. Now, your other question, there's another part of it though, which is there a problem with single syllable words running out of steam? And I assure you, yes, there's a problem. I write also a kind of 白话绝句 myself because I want all of English to describe, to write a 绝句. Sometimes I want to have a modern feeling to my poetry. So I'll write in a kind of free verse 绝句, of course. And there's no problem with that. And maybe I'll add that to the competition in the future to remind people that like 闻一多 or 国文弱 or others, you can break the form, expand the form, but the principles of 古代诗学 is still inside and still inside the poems. And so when you first learn how to do 对联 and 平仄 and 起承转合, all this stuff, the qing and jing, that stuff can live in a free verse too, right? But it's a whole nother universe. English poetry has not heard these ideas before. Even though we are 150 years into the history, they did not come with Pound. They did not come with Snyder. They did not come with Whaley. These are lost in translation because translation doesn't do 平仄. It doesn't do 对联. It doesn't do the form. So the only way to transmit the ideas is to compose original poetry. And the only way to transmit those ideas are on monosyllable words. After you learn it, like 庄子, after you cross the river, leave the boat. Fine. You've already learned so much about the world, so much about nature, about consciousness, about Chinese culture. It's okay. You can leave the boat now. But so I think that it is limited as a vehicle, but what a great limited vehicle it is. Yeah, so that's my answer to that question.
好的 ，Thank you，谢谢啊。好，那我们看下一个问题啊。下一个问题是，This is a very interesting and practical. So reminding one of Ma Zhiyuan's short lyric, "Sunnies and Autumn Thaws." So I believe this is 天净沙秋思, right? And my question is, can such translations of Chinese poems can still precisely called poems? 这个翻译啊，这个中文的还能不能就是确切的被叫做诗歌？
Yeah. So I wish I had this poem. I really love this poem. I love my translation of the poem too. I worked many years on it, and it's in the form that can be in song. Because Ma Zhiyuan is writing in the yuanqu form, so it's a sung form of poetry. It's a very beautiful poem because the sound of the poem is so powerful. But when you translate it into English, it's just images, right? It's just old trees, night, gu zhang lao shu hun ya, old trees, night crows, and so anyway, it's all images all the way through, right? But when you listen to the, it's the sound at the end of everything, So when you have, let's do it together, right? It's a 古筝老树昏鸦，小桥流水人家。古道西风瘦马，夕阳西下断肠人。 在天 that horse is dying, is starving to death. The soul is dying, and it's like it's a really very shrill, powerful vowel. And so when you hear this poem performed, it's a really different experience than reading it in translation. And so when you translate it into, old trees, night crows, stream flows, west wind, lean horse, old roads, slow sunsets west from sky's edge. I can't do it, darn it. I almost can remember my translation, but not quite. But you can actually put the vowel and elongate it, because the monosyllables are built to transmit such emotion in them because of the way that yin song works. So Madriyuan has been reduced, in my opinion, reduced to images. But when we hear the images, our souls cry, they grieve with the poet. And so translating is, to my mind, always kind of problem, because we overemphasize the meaning of words, and we de-emphasize the sounds that those words make, and that the choices a poet makes and the form of poetry and the structure of the sound are deeply meaningful spiritually, culturally, cosmologically, yin yang wu xing dao, right? And that information cannot normally be transmitted in translation. So is it still poetry? I would say yes, definitely. But for me, poetry without sound is painting. And my father's a painter. I respect painters. My wife is a painter. But, I'm a poet. I want sound. So when I hear that poem in translation, I want it to sound. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So can I understand it's like I noticed that the original like Chinese, there's Tianjin Sha Qiu Si, so the vowel is ah, but when you translate into English, and the vowel become kind of all, right?
Yeah,
So
in my version, it has to be, because that's the meaning of the poem.
yes.
Problem of translation, right? Because you have locked into the words the poet chooses.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. But I mean, so you actually want to express that it doesn't matter if or all. Actually, both of them express kind of spiritual, spiritually sad feeling of the whole picture of this poem. So that is the point that you translate this poem, the 天津沙秋思, but not literally like the translating to the kind of modern English, but still keep the original like feeling or original like the rhythm of like the ancient poem as Chinese.
Yeah, because it's a structure we can transmit deep feelings through, not just the meaning of the words, but the structure that they're made. You had another question here after that, and I guess we're almost out of time, so I want to make sure.
Yeah, sure. So here's a question that Hai Shi 教授, you're such an accomplished scholar on Chinese language and culture. Your 英歌历诗, okay, I guess it's English, impressed me so deeply. So how are English and your current 律绝 related English poetry practices connected with each other?
Oh, that's very kind of you, Hui Wen.
Kind of a humorous English 历史. Okay.
英歌历诗 is my most well-known work, because it's playful, and it's a collage work, right? So the meanings continually change, and it always challenges the reader. It challenges me. And it took 5 years to write the libretto for the opera, because the words keep changing, and I never settle on which ones to use. So I love that work. It was and remains very important to me. It actually wasn't the first thing. Jueju was first for me. It was 1996 when I invented the English Jueju form, and 英歌历诗 was 2008 when I first began the work, and I finished it in 2010. Sorry, no, 2007 to 11, because I kept changing it. So not quite 5 years, but almost. So Jueju came first. I wanted to turn English into Chinese. 英格里诗 allowed me to turn Chinese into English. And then later with 唐朝英语 or Pinyin, that project is with the Fanxie, that really turns, Chinese into English, very smooth English with no interruption. So it's a kind of perfect blending of the two languages using Fanxie. That was, another project. And then I came back to Jueju, really came back to it, because the students, when I started the competition again, I started to get surprised by the quality of the work. And I started to really develop and deepen the system and think about, how do I teach the system and what is the meaning of it? Why write Jueju, right? The bigger questions about how Jueju can be a solution for mental health today for young people, how it can help with cultural diplomacy and a difficult time with US-China relations. Jueju is a very powerful tool, and so I ended up spending a lot more years developing that system. But I think of them as my work is always in the same kind of thing, which is, how do we live between the two languages so that the space between them doesn't put one on top and one on the bottom, like translation, source, and target? No, they both happen at the same time. They are merged into one interlanguage. And the space between languages are beautiful and meaningful and deep and rich. And we all live in between languages, actually. But we write as if we're in one language or another. So how do we write in the real world between them? And this work, I think, is a step in that direction. So I appreciate your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shi Jiaoshou. And the rest of the three questions are actually pretty easy and simple. So I appreciate if Shi Jiaoshou can just answer in the short way. So this one is this is very interesting. I'm sorry, the next one. Okay, so how do you view the relationship between literary poems and lyrics of songs? What's the similarity and difference between these two literary forms, both using syllable skills? 这是一个诗歌和现在的这个歌词的一个比较。
Yeah, let's see here. So I'm not sure if I'm getting this or trying to read along with you. This isn't the calligraphy though, so I was getting lost there.
This
So
is before Hai Shi Jiaoshou, the one before Hai Shi Jiaoshou. So how do you view the relationship between literary poems and lyrics of songs?
yeah,
Have you found it?
yeah, I'll just answer. I didn't find it, but I know we're run out of time. Insofar as teaching Yin Song, I think is probably where most of my emphasis on how to connect the two, how to connect singing to poetry, because Yin Song is very rigid rules with Pingze. And then, of course, in English, how to put the poems into the music was my other project, where I really think, I guess, with other performers, what would work well and not. Otherwise, I haven't. My son is the musician. He lives in New York. You can check him out. His band name is Stalling, like our name. So you could ask of my son instead. He's the expert on lyrics. Yeah, what's the next question?
Okay, so next one is my previous drama teacher told us in English poem rhythms and meters are made for comedy effort. Is that accurate? 这是真的吗？
My work has been very much concentrated on being not funny. And humor is very dangerous for interlanguage, because interlanguage has a lot of taboo. So whether it's Zhonglish, my Chinese, is kind of 美国的口音, the Hanyu is sort of, this is not proper Chinese. Maybe 中式英语, this is kind of these ideas of interlanguage being funny mean that we can't listen to them. We don't feel them. We can't open our heart to them. We can't explore the depth, beauty, and philosophical breadth of it. So 英格里诗 is written in very unfunny characters, so that even though it sounds potentially funny, as soon as you hear it sung and you read the words, it's not funny at all. it takes the humor completely out. And jueju as well, really important to me to teach how to 这么朗诵 or 吟诵 correctly, because if you don't do it, it can sound childish and maybe funny. And we have to protect English, interlanguage, English Chinese interlanguage from humor. That's my job. I think someone else can do a different thing. They're free to do funny things, but I'm always try to steer as far away from the comedic effects as possible, for the reason of racism and of these things. They're really, in my position, not something I'm going to toy with at all.
Okay, thank you, 石教授. And the last question. So, as non-Chinese poems or couplets are often used in calligraphy, have you ever thought how to write your and your students' English poetry discussed tonight in Chinese calligraphy?
Yeah. So two answers quickly. The answer that I do now, and if we were in the arts gallery right now, I could show it to you, because when you use the Tangchao Yu, you can pin the English with Chinese characters. So you can write the jueju in Chinese characters. It's English jueju, but you write it in Chinese fanjie. And then, of course, you can use Chinese calligraphy to encode the English poem. So that's the whole circle, where you take the English language and you write 鲁诗, and then you put it into Chinese characters. You can, write those as calligraphy, or with the stamping, with the woodblock printing. And I think that's what I like to do, that when I have a student for a very long time, because then they leave my class with a deeper understanding, not only of the sound, but also somewhat of Chinese characters. The other question, the other earlier idea I had was I used to write the English monosyllable, because usually they're 4, 5, 6 letters. So I'd use a block style and write them as a square. And then Xubing actually made a much better version of this than I had. And sometimes I'll point students to Xubing's work and say, you can use Xubing's square calligraphy English if you want to have that. So you can think of Xubing's work as a way to, to quickly get to the Chinese calligraphic. However, other students who do like English calligraphy, of course, has its own tradition of calligraphy. And there's a fairly long history with even with Steve Jobs, who studied under professors in East Asian philosophy or East Asian culture as an undergraduate, who also was in the poetry world, and calligraphy was very important, even writing in English, so handwriting poems and so on. And so this was I think an important part of counterculture of trans-Pacific poetry. And Hank Glazier is, I think, probably a good poet for you to look at if you're interested in someone who uses calligraphy in English poetry. I would look to him, but I leave that mostly to the students to do. But the Tangchao Yingyu is a pretty fun way to bring it back to Chinese characters and calligraphy.
好的，好，非常感谢石教授哈。那么，因为我们的这个时间关系啊，可能今天我们的讲座呢就要到这里就结束了。但是我们非常感谢石教授今天给我们带来了这么具有创意的一个跨越古代和现代、跨越中文和英文的，那么将中国古代的绝句很好的在英文的世界里诠释的这样的一个概念啊，以及它的实践。那么我们也是期待石教授在未来呢，能够给我们带来更多的关于中国的这个文化，那么中国的艺术在英语世界里面传播的一些创意方面的思维和方法。那么再一次感谢石教授今天参与我们的讨论参加我们的华美人文的讲座系列。我们也是期待下一次能够邀请石教授跟我们分享更多、更有趣的、更具有创意的内容。非常感谢大家。Thank you so much, 石教授。
Thank you very much. And if you want, you can find some of this stuff in longer form on my YouTube channel. I'll put more material here if I can from our talk, so you can access it. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I learned a lot from your comments.
谢谢。好的，那么在我们结束之前呢，我们还是按照惯例给大家来介绍一下我们下一次的讲座。那么我们下一次的讲座呢，将是在 美东时间2024年1月27日晚8点到9点半，也就是北京时间2024年1月28日早9点到10点半。那现在我们还是13个小时的时差啊。那么下一次呢，我们的讲座内容将是《红楼梦》中的小人物，聚光灯下做主角。那相信很多我们的听众朋友、观众朋友们，大家都非常熟悉《红楼梦》啊。我们也是邀请了很多的这个红学的一些专家啊来为我们这个诠释《红楼梦》。所以呢，如果对《红楼梦》，尤其是《红楼梦》里面可能往往不被人所关注的一些配角小人物感兴趣啊，从这个切入点来了解《红楼梦》的一个全貌，那么希望大家呢能够参加我们下一次的讲座，和我们一起来分享这一部分的内容。那么同时呢，我们还有一个这个线下的一个表演啊，线下的一个演出也在这个持续的安排当中。那么就是在美东时间的2月3日下午2点到4点，那么将是在华美协进社来举办这个来自于这个上海这个昆曲评弹，来自于这个上海的评弹啊。那么也是这一次呢，我们邀请到这个这一些评弹的名角啊，从这个中国来到我们美国纽东，那么将这个中国的这样的一个传统的艺术形式来带给大家。所以如果对这一评弹感兴趣的朋友们，大家呢一定及早注册，那么到时候呢我们现场参加我们的活动。那么这一场活动呀，也是我们在疫情之后呢为数不多的一次线下的活动啊。所以呢，如果已经这个几年没有相见的老朋友们，大家希望借以我们华美人文学会的平台和昔日的老朋友们相见，那么这一次呢，也是一个非常难得的机会啊，那么也是非常期待到时候能跟大家在线下见面。好了，那今天呢，我们的这个讲座到此就要结束了。那么再一次感谢这个石教授给我们的分享，以及今天我们嘉宾的参与哈。那么也是要感谢这个许诗妍老师的这个介绍。好，那么我们今天的内容就到这里结束了。那么期待下一次和大家再一次这个相聚在我们华美人文学会的周末讲座系列。好，那我们就在这里再见了哈。我在纽约，那么石教授在 Oklahoma， 那徐老师现在是在
拉斯维加斯。
拉斯维加斯。对，我们祝大家这个在美国的不同地方，祝大家这个早安晚安啊，祝大家周末愉快。好了，那我们就到这里结束了，再见。
好，再见。
嗯。